and looking forward to this discussion, which is really looking ahead a little bit at the infrastructures that are here and also that are coming, software-defined networks and beyond. I'd like to introduce Kyle Keller, who is the Cloud Business Director for EMC, and thank them for their support of MeriTalk's initiative of the Data Center Exchange. We greatly appreciate it. We couldn't do these things without public-private partnerships and without the dialogue between both industry and government. It's what makes it, I think, add a lot of value for everyone at the end of the day. So Kyle, thank you, and I'll let you introduce your panel and the topic, and we're looking forward to a good discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you for everyone for coming and braving the cold. I'll just tell you that even though my office is local, I tend to live on airplanes, so you can blame me for bringing the cold in from the Northwest. The good news is it goes away at about 3:30 p.m. today when I leave Reagan National. So I think you have better weather coming your way. But thank you again for coming, and I think this will be an interesting session, and I do hope that we'll have some participation from folks in the room, and I hope this is a little thought-provoking, potentially even a little controversial as it relates to our market specifically in the federal space. But I do want to thank Dr. Alissa Johnson for joining us, the Deputy CIO for the Executive Office of the President, and Mr. Walt Bigelow, Chief of the Information Technology Systems Division, Office of Science and Technology at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearm, and Explosives. So I do appreciate them joining us today and hopefully grounding us on a conversation around potentially something that, you know, from my perspective, very quickly surpassed cloud in the buzzword of the day, and that's software defined. And I think we can attach that to just about anything in the market. Essentially, if we boiled it down, I think the promise of this kind of next generation of technology delivery is kind of delivering what we did for server virtualization to all aspects of the data center, right? Networking and storage and other things. And as I had some conversations this morning with folks in the audience today, a lot of conversations about, man, I'd love to get from my really difficult kind of operations infrastructure that I'm managing today in my data center to a better place, and I'd like to be able to do it as fast as possible. Walt and I were talking backstage, and he said, I just want a lift and shift mechanism. If you can come up with that technology, so all I got to do is lift and shift, and I get to a better place, and it's better, faster, cheaper, I'd love to do that. But we all recognize that there are details in the data center where that's not necessarily a possibility today. So we'll talk to some of those components and some of those capabilities, and we invite you to participate today as well, and we'd like to get your perspective. Recently, MeriTalk released some findings from a study where, basically a panel of federal executives said, look, we tend to spend over 70% of our budget on keeping the lights on, right? Call it life support, if you will, on the legacy, but it's very difficult for us to shift, and we're all in this together and trying to figure out how do we deliver IT most efficiently, right? I think of cloud as a consumption model, right? It's a different way to procure the assets to support the mission. For me, as an individual, my perspective on software defined is the technology enabler to get us to that kind of consumption model, right? Everything as a service and capabilities there. We're seeing some very interesting things on the industry side. So when we think about the federal government and industry partnerships, a lot of our private industry customers at very large scales are seeing challenges where literally they can't manage infrastructure the way they used to in the past. And so that's where software-defined networking and software-defined storage components become absolutely critical, right? And so we see that shift on the private industry side, and we do believe that there's an opportunity, right? Whether or not we're ready for this in the federal market is to be seen, and I think we'll share some perspectives on that today. But I do think that promise is there, and we do hope to to invert the spend on those kind of components, but. I guess at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Johnson and Walt, and maybe get your perspective, right? A lot of buzz around software-defined, looking out 3 years, 5 years, is it a reality for your mission? And maybe where do you see it, to start us off, where do you see it applying value to the mission?
So I initially think that it is difficult to embrace 3 to 5. We're just now, from a federal government perspective, just now moving into and trying that first data center consolidation and cloud. And what's making data center consolidation so difficult is the complexity of our data centers. So how do I eliminate one, move everything from there, kind of expand another, and bring everything kind of together? And that creates some difficulty. So when you think about software-defined data centers, that extends the level of difficulty in the transition phase. But when you talk about return on investment and the lifespan of the data center, it gets a little easier. It gets a little easier to digest. Sounds like a buzzword right now, but so is cloud. And everybody was saying, oh no, I want to hug my server. I want to hold on to it. I want to hug my device. And so it wasn't until we said, well, wait a minute, Gmail is cloud. That's mail in the cloud. It's when people started making those connections that made it a lot easier to consume and a lot easier for us to understand how we can expand that thought. So I think it's about really expanding the thought of software-defined data centers, re-evaluating what that means for the CIO's office, because it changes the CIO's office, it changes all IT organizations, and then, kind of where do we put our investments? We're going to have, lots of cost savings and efficiencies found, so now where do we make our next investment? And I want to talk about that because I think the next investment is going to be applications.
Absolutely.
So were you saying you think the 3 to 5 years is too short or too long?
I think it's somewhere like right there in the middle.
You're welcome.
I think it's somewhere right there in the middle because 3 years, think about how long it's taken us so far to consolidate data centers, and we're still not, kind of where we need to be as far as that is concerned.
We're a long way from where we need
We're
to be.
right. And so now it's really a paradigm shift because I was just getting my mind around cloud, wrapped around that, and now I've got to get my mind wrapped around the software-defined label, if you may.
Do you see it as an enabler, though, right? Do you see
Oh,
some of these,
definitely.
right? So I see these multiple themes around optimization and efficiency, but I do think a lot of the challenges and perhaps some of the roadblocks that we've had to getting to to 80%, 90%, 100% virtualized infrastructures is there's a ton of legacy complexity in
Yep.
those spaces. And I think there's promise in the technology capabilities to simplify some of that, to maybe allow us to migrate things that technically we might not have even been able to approach in the past, right?
And faster.
Do they
So
come
that's
together
important.
faster, right?
Right. I have customers that ask me for a certain thing. They want an application rolled out tomorrow. And I've got to stand up new servers, new infrastructure for some things with a software-defined data center. That shortens that time span, that development phase where, from the requirement to the deployment phase. Sure. So, definitely an enabler. And I tweeted out, is it a game changer or is it lame? And I really think it's a game changer.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
But it also will have a huge impact on our workforce because right now we're very much organized in silos of structure. I've got my storage area network guys, I've got my server guys, I've got my Windows guys, my Unix guys, my network guys, and on and on and on and on. That if it becomes software defined, how much more does that all mesh together and become a unified workforce, for lack of a better phrase, or unified skill set? Because there's still expertise in there, but they all cut across. And going back to introduction a little bit. You stole about half my thunder,
apologize.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't have your notes.
I think the biggest potential impact for federal agencies with software-defined data centers is that ability to do more lift and shift. Because I think we can do that. Because we have all that legacy heritage stuff out there that, I've got, stuff that's built in Power Builder that has IP addresses in it, is looking for a specific defined storage area network infrastructure. And yeah, I'd love to take that application and modernize it and put it, new in 3-layer infrastructure with a web front end and all. But I don't have the time, the money, and it's not really worth the effort to do that. But I still want to get it the heck out of my government-run data center so I can turn that thing off. So it's not elegant, but there are instances where a lift and shift is appropriate. So keep it going for another couple, 3, 4, 5 years, because otherwise I got to keep that data center open. And okay, if I can move the 50% of the stuff that I can move today, quote unquote, out of the data center, move it into the cloud, I still got 50% left there, and I'm still running that data center. I'm not saving hardly anything.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting perspective. And the thing I would share is I think we're on this journey because everyone's on this path to get as virtualized as possible. And I think the underlying assumption is, at least at the server and the application level, a lot of things got a lot easier once we started to virtualize them, right? There's still plumbing and there's still a lot of complexity beneath that line. And so that's where I see a lot of promise in the software-defined networking space. But I do think it is more of a journey, right? It's that standardization process. One of the mega trends we see is x86 is dominating the market in all things. And in my world, from a storage storage component, x86 really about 4 years ago really became the de facto standard for us as a manufacturer and OEM, and we stopped shipping silicon when we started to standardize on commodity hardware. Right? And so once we standardize on things, things become easier. Now we can do things like virtual storage arrays or virtual networks that can be abstracted up onto standardized platforms. But the blunt reality is we still have the legacy of everything that we've built. And your silo example is very, I think, pertinent, because one of the biggest technology is always the easiest thing, right? It does come down to people, process. We'll talk about this later as well, but technology too. But the collision of that technology is also confusing a lot of organizations on who manages this. Right? Virtual administrators can deploy networks, they can deploy storage platforms. Why have teams siloed around that and structured around that in that domain? So do those folks become retitled, reallocated to other things, maybe more strategic? You know, how do we handle that approach?
Well, see, that's kind of where I think we should be focusing on. When you think about cloud, when you think about, you know, where we're moving to the next point, you've got to be able to separate the old thinking of the organization to really what the new CIO is being turned into. And it's really about delivering services and how you deliver services and applications and customized services. And I'm not saying we don't care about our people in the organization. We definitely do. But there's a redefinement that has to happen in order for this to be successful. So, you know, yeah, I love my systems administrators, and I love, you know, my Unix admins and my Microsoft and Windows Server admins. I love them to death, but I need my CapEx and OpEx to go down.
Sure.
So that I can, you know, show some efficiencies. My budget is being cut. I think one way or another, either we're going to gracefully move into this, or we're going to be forced to move into this, because I think vendors are going to start supporting that type of infrastructure and start giving us that at a better cost than the older cost model.
Yeah, I think it's interesting on the on your point on the being forced to go into it, because the perspective I have from an industry side of the table is, I think the fiscal crisis is forcing this to happen. I mean, Mr. Halverson was sharing earlier, hey, you want to cut, you know, don't cut my CapEx, you know, cost avoidance. Help me save money today, and how do we do that? You know,
The fiscal crisis made us consolidate data centers. Mm-hmm. You know, it's Stephen Van Rokel said, you know, cloud first. We want to move stuff to the cloud. Well, that was a good technical decision, but it was definitely a fiscal decision as well. When you think about long-term return on investment, things of that nature. So I think fiscally, yeah, definitely.
yeah, I think it's certainly gonna push us there. And then again, I think the collision of the technologies are gonna have that collision of the people. But we're also seeing this in the context of cloud. I think that collision's already taking place, right? When we talk to IT transformation, it is about the modernization and realignment of a lot of resources. It's not just technical resources, but people. And then this is the most disruptive part for us, I think, in the federal government, is the process component, right? Doing things differently as a service. How do I acquire these technologies? Who pays for some of these technologies? Where they used to be bundled by silo, right? Where do particular budgets align to some of those capabilities too?
And related to that is, okay, so we all have our federal data centers because, you know, my information is sensitive and I can't trust anybody else to touch it. Well, then we're beginning to think about, okay, we're starting to move out in the cloud, and yeah, my public-facing stuff I can put in AWS, but I can't put my law enforcement sensitive stuff. Yeah, I can move it into cloud, but it's got to be a federal certified FISMA high cloud running in a dedicated center in a cage, so it's not really cloud anymore. So with software-defined data centers, is there the potential to use that to leverage and crack that open a little bit more, and that we can meet federal ATOs and CNAs at a software control level as opposed to a physical control level? Because then it doesn't matter where my stuff lives as long as it meets those software-defined standards.
So cloud is breaking all sorts of boundaries. And when you talk about certification and accreditation, that just opens up a whole nother bucket for us, as far as, you know, the roadblocks that are
Personnel
coming.
clearances.
And personnel clearances. But it also forces us to trust our vendors. It forces us to be more trusting. You know, I keep saying this, we want to hug our server. Something goes down, we want to run to the data center and look at the server and see the red light blinking. And I don't know if that's not really like the way of the future.
There is a tectonic shift here, though, right? Because the controls exist today from a capability and a technology that
Right.
you can logically, right, separate, segregate, control. And I would contend that most customers see the promise in that very example. where we need to be hugging our applications, we need to be hugging our
Yes.
mission, we don't need to be hugging the underlying infrastructure. And I think that the promise of the whole software-defined anything is that you maintain the agency control of said workload no matter where that may reside. Now that's longer term, right?
Right.
And that's definitely on the longer end of that spectrum of evolution. But I think that there's promise in that as a go
But
forward.
then I only have to pay for what I'm using. I'm hoping, when you talk about consumption on demand, then if I need a lot, then I can use a lot. Instead of me buying terabytes and terabytes of storage just so I can prepare for the next 30 years of the next administrations and all of that, I can just buy, use what I need, and as I expand, then I use that.
Walt?
It still comes down to, what the mission is and what we need to do and how we need to accomplish it. We have a lot of legacy services, a lot of legacy culture that we have to address. And without going back to the ATO bit, we've got hundreds of ISOs in the federal government that are physically oriented.
That's right.
You've got to have a cage, you've got to have physical separation, it's got logical, and God forbid the logical is in the same place that Citibank is, or because their data is not nearly as important as ours is.
Yeah.
So here's another key point though. Is the government in the business of owning IT things? So that's a big question you have to ask yourself when you talk about the future and how we redefine. I say this all the time. The government has a unique opportunity to not be in the business of owning things, but focus on what our true mission is. And so when I think about my mission in the executive office of the president of serving the American people, right, I'm an inward-facing CIO, so I'm an enabler. I enable the president and the other components to be able to do what they need to do. Now, how do I enable them? I should be enabling them by providing them various IT services, but I don't want to have to worry about the things that I need to hold on to and use my budget on. I'd like to spend that money on more software developers, more thinkers that can solve some
More the
problems.
innovation side of the equation.
When we talk about big data, I like some correlation and a lot of other things to go along with that. But right now I'm thinking about availability, reliability.
That's 70% of the pie. You're
Right.
focusing on
I'm
keeping the lights
focusing
on.
on that.
But you just threatened my 30-year federal career.
I did. I did.
Absolutely.
But it depends
We need
because
to.
I still think that there is usefulness of that skill set, of those skill sets. I still think that I need my smart engineers because there's a virtualization part of that I need them to be able to say, okay, we're going to scale here, we're going to scale there, and do the planning that I need to happen.
Absolutely. My perspective is, and I agree 100%, it's literally about delivering IT the most efficiently, wherever that is, right? And this isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all, in my opinion, right? Most people recognize it. It's not going to be an all-or-nothing proposition.
Right.
And to expand, I think, on what you're sharing, I see more as the broker of services for the organization, right? The CIO of today is more of a broker of services. And those services could be anywhere. They could be in 15 divergent cloud infrastructures.
Right.
They could be in analytics capabilities. They could be traditional transactional workloads like Oracle or SAP and things like that. But we're really shifting our mindset from keeping those sets of lights and the blinkies on, right? Which we don't see a lot of value. But Walt, to your point on you're threatening my 30-year federal career, I would go the complete opposite. I think the relevance on that experience in the market is so important, right? We can always bring in technologists to do things, but folks who understand the mission is significantly important to me because that ties back to the folks who understand that technology can then tie the value back to the mission. And that's really enabling, and I think that's really, really powerful. So I don't see them, yes, it might have been focused on a particular subset of technologies. We hope that folks see this as a tremendous opportunity. With disruption comes immense opportunity, and I think all of us in the room have a tremendous, 5 years ahead of us as we start to think about how we put some of these things together for the mission.
With disruption comes an immense opportunity to live through change.
Right.
And change is a hard thing to do. As I mentioned earlier, I still have hundreds of agents out there who are absolutely convinced the first copy of a digital video is the only one they can send to court. It's a digital file. The first one and the thousandth one is the same, as long as you got an audit trail on it.
That's right.
But no, we got to send the first one. We got to take that one, put it on disk, put it on the shelf, literally.
Wow. All right. Well, let's open it up. I mean, are there any thoughts or questions from the audience today? Right, as you guys are kind of contemplating, specifically to your mission. Go ahead, sir. We do have microphones coming your way. I apologize. Didn't know logistically.
While we wait for him, I want to mention Mary Jane Schmidt. She's in here somewhere. She retweeted something that the Department of Navy CIO said, and he said security, social, and data were the three big key points for cloud. And I think they're the big three key points for software-defined data centers, and I think they're the big three key points for any IT solution as we move forward.
Yeah, this is a question more for Dr. Johnson. And in the private industry, the software-defined networking has been going on for quite a few years now. And my question for you is, what kind of policies or initiatives from the federal CIO's office would like for the federal agencies to look into software-defined networking? And by definition, that will introducing competitions because of this is the networking. I mean, the vendor neutral solution for when you deploy that. I mean, adopt that approach. And the reality is a lot of federal agencies are not multi-vendor environment in terms of their networking infrastructure. And
So from let me say this. These thoughts are my own and not and not a representation of the Obama administration. I don't think that, well, let me rephrase that. Software-defined data centers are an implementation, as I see it, an implementation of cloud. So I don't know that you will have a statement come out from Stephen Van Rokel that says we've got to implement a certain number of software-defined data centers now. I think with him, with the data center consolidation, with the digital strategy, Cloud First, I think he leaves the solution to everyone to say, hey, okay, I want to do cloud, and I want to implement it in a software-defined data center type of way to my cloud, because that can happen. So I don't necessarily think that you will see upcoming policies or anything like that. Now, let me also say that Stephen Van Rokel is the U.S. CIO. He's outward-facing. I am the EOP deputy CIO that's inward-facing, that enables, the president and his mission and those components. But I have not heard anything from his office on implementing policies that would force the government to move in that direction.
Good morning. Is the federal acquisition workforce and policy apparatus keeping pace with folks like you that are leading the technology revolution? And in the event of a subscription-based cloud IT for a service, what happens to you, to the vendor community, and to the mission in the event of something crazy that could never happen, like sequestration or a government shutdown?
That's a good question.
That's a phenomenal question.
That
Would
is
you
a
like
really
to
good
start?
question.
Is acquisition keeping up? No. There are a good number of forward-leaning acquisition folks out there that are really trying to do their best. But
Acquisition isn't keeping up with is having a hard time keeping up with shared services.
yes, but then there's the FAR that's there that is still woefully behind the times and is going to be that way for several years. And we do still have a fair number of acquisition people that tend to stand behind it as opposed to use it as a tool. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in partnering with our acquisition folks to help educate them and bring them more forward and to support this. In regards to you want to try for the budget side of this?
No.
Okay.
I could lead the
No,
witness.
because I don't have the authority, and whatever I say would only be speculative at best. So I will reserve those
No.
comments.
Maybe I could provide an industry perspective on the budgetary side. I think it's extremely difficult, right? Because a lot of these models are moving to consumption-based models, right? So to your point earlier, it is top of mind for all of us that we say we love when we can have a solution that we pay for what we use. Well, if we happen to be running a workload that uses quite a lot, sometimes that's the other side of that equation, and that's difficult, right? And so that's truly, Mr. Howerson said, know your data. I agree with that, but I also say understand the workload, because that's extremely important depending on the model. Now, there's 1,000 different ways to acquire things. We can buy, build, and install, configure, and leverage that over 5 years, right, and get that investment out of it. We could do consumption-based model, which means as utilization spikes, so does my bill. We could do monthly run rates, which are more flat line, a little bit more budget friendly, but these are the things that are going through everyone's head as they're starting to think about that IT transformation component. How do I budget for something like this, where traditionally I had that flat line, line item in my budget, and it was very easy for me to secure that funding, show that funding, right, report back on that kind of capability.
But I do think that there is an effort being done to make sure we are educating the appropriations committees, those in Congress, with the true cost of keeping the lights on, and then what we need to do to move forward. As we all in our different positions go up to the Hill to testify and ask for appropriations and things like that. There is a true effort to not just say this is what I need, but this is what I need and why, and then further, even though you thought, or even though, all of the vendors say, oh, efficiency, you're going to save money, well, that, you've got to give me some time to put some investment in there before I show my true savings. So there is an effort that's occurring, right now to make sure that that message is being heard.
So the question I have, it's more for Dr. Johnson and for Walt, but I'd love to hear your input as well, Kyle, if you have some.
Okay.
It seems like only yesterday the focus was on faster CPUs, faster switches, bigger storage arrays, data center consolidation. Today, though, it's more about service delivery. And so my question is, especially as we free up some of these resources that can focus more on the service delivery, what are some of those applications? What are some of those services that you see are the immediate needs as we free these resources up? Good question, huh?
Yeah, that is a good question. You're going to pay for that question, right? I know him, actually. I think that's a good point, a good question, and I think that all is dependent upon the mission. So when I think about, what we do, there are a lot of automation, more automation that can occur from a services perspective. That we have various teams right now. We've got a software applications team that does all of our, great applications, but I think there's some expansion that can happen there. We don't do a lot of big data in our shop, but I think there's an opportunity for us to do more of that. So I don't think it's really about what we can't do anymore. It's now what does this free us up to be able to do?
Right, and I think it's a good thing that I'm becoming less concerned about speeds and feeds, because I don't want to have. I don't care about how the electricity comes in the building. So why do I care how I get the power? I mean the information infrastructure. We got a long way to go before we get to that place, but I think that's a good evolutionary model we're moving towards. I need to worry about, am I buying the level of service and the response time I need from that vendor? And if they meet that, I don't care how they get it to me. If they do it with one box that's got 47 high-powered CPUs in it, or they're doing it with 47 boxes with low-powered, I don't care.
So Matt, I think the consumerization of IT kind of changes this whole picture. So I look at it as a big train, and the consumerization of IT and everything that we experience outside of the federal box that we're in is moving along. And the federal government is, I'm not going to put us all the way at the caboose. We're somewhere in the middle, but the edge of that thing is just moving, and we're trying to keep pace, and we're trying to make sure that our customers have similar experience, not necessarily the same, but similar experience that they feel and benefit from outside, you know.
Absolutely. I think the end users are driving that demand for
Yes.
the brokerage model, for this as a service conversation. Because at the end of the day, why does technology or IT in general exist? It's to deliver a value to the mission, and that's fundamentally what it is. I would add an industry perspective to your question around, historically we're very focused on performance. The sidebar effect that's been happening, Moore's Law is real. And right, the evolution of technology in general and the power of x86 today versus what it was even 3 years ago, and all the technologies around hypervisors and other things are allowing us to ultimately kind of forget about that, right? New technology is very disruptive in all facets of the organization, like storage with enterprise flash, and we're seeing this big shift of things that deliver performance at very great cost metrics, right? And so can allow us to focus on other things. But the big one for me, I would say, are really two. It's mobile and it's big data. Absolutely. This explosion of data, we're a sensor-rich environment already as it relates to the federal government, but even in private industry, companies like GE are putting in telemetry in their engines, and transatlantic flights are creating hundreds of terabytes of data, right? Well, that equates to real money in private industry because they can look at trends in that engine in flight, in real time, and look at are there pieces, parts of that engine that need to be broken down. Today they have to take the entire engine apart and figure out what's what, right? And it's very expensive, and they do that on a regimented schedule. That's potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So I think there's a tremendous opportunity. We think about big data and actually farming all these disparate data sources. That can we drive efficiency? Can we deliver better services back to our civilian community? Or obviously we're leveraging this type of stuff against the bad guys too.
From a workforce perspective, I have, Gen X, Gen Y, and sooner or later I have Gen Z that are probably going to be interns coming in, pretty soon. That's their mindset. Their mindset is services and analytical, and not I need to plug this in and configure the router. They have no knowledge of that. It just works for them. My daughter turns on her phone, it just works. She doesn't even think about how and why, and I try to invigorate her, and I say, why don't you look at this? And she's like, no, that's okay.
Okay, so that's exciting to me, right? That's a great perspective. So how do we recruit more of that into the government domain, right? How do we get more of those types of mindsets and folks into that to help us, right? Because I think that does certainly help, right? We have to get from where we are to where we'd like to be, but some folks are they're taking this in real time right now.
Right. So we have, if when you think about how a campaign works, there are a lot of young people that work on the campaign. Then those young people with the great ideas, and they're using all of these tools to get, numbers up and polling and all of that. They're using all of this stuff outside the campaign. And then they come into the federal government thinking, oh, this is going to be great. And then they're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? And I think we have to hone that talent. We've got to focus on those as well as focus on baby boomers who are saying, "Oh my goodness, I'm about to lose my job." We've got to focus on the people on the younger generation that's coming in and taking over and saying, "Wait a minute, you took an hour to do that. I can script that for you and get it done in 15 minutes, and that's it." Like that's where we're moving. We see it happen all the time. We have our SWAT team come, and their SWAT is our software applications team. And they come from colleges, and Michael Hornsby is our director of operations and engineering. He runs that whole organization. And they come in from different colleges, and they sit with us, and they say, "Oh my gosh, it took you an hour to do that. Give me about 15 more minutes, and I'll have it done. You'll never have to redo it again."
Powerful.
It is. That's where we're moving, and that's the workforce that's coming in. Mm-hmm. And we don't want them to inherit servers,
a non-mobile enabled workforce.
Right,
even, right?
right.
I mean, that's another piece of it. It's the always connected and ever social, and that's continuing evolution.
Right.
We have a question in the back.
Two-part question. One, what do you see as the impact of FITARA in terms of the acquisition? impact. Actually, it was the last MeriTalk conference. Representatives Connolly and Alissa were here speaking to that in the Cloud Computing Caucus. And also touching on the consumerization of IT. How much do you see shadow IT, that is the end user driving that, particularly the government folks, that demand and basically going around the formal acquisition process to drive that acquisition and purchase of services?
We don't have shadow IT in the federal government.
Heck no.
I think we need, as leaders, we need to learn how to leverage those shadow IT efforts and bring them up and make them more visible and use them as the tools to drive the organization forward. It's absolutely happening. To an extent, try to help do that, you know, tip a bunch of these things out to people and stand back and get out of their way kind of thing. It's very disruptive to the federal government, and that's a very good thing. So we have to build from there on that. There are a lot of good things coming there. You know, the interns coming in and that scripting and all that kind of stuff is a way of embracing that shadow IT and bringing it in, and that's encouraging to hear, and we all need to do more of it.
I think when you think about the consumerization of IT, I mean, I think everybody's heard this story. The president came in and said, I want to use my BlackBerry. And, you know, we were all like, oh my gosh, he wants to use a BlackBerry. When people outside were like, well, what's the big deal? He wants to use a BlackBerry. You know, I think consumerization, it forces the government, like I said, it's a unique opportunity for us to look and say, wow, we can do that. We can implement that. And instead of coming from a place of no, which has sometimes been the culture in some areas, we can come from a place of, okay, we can move towards a yes or a compromise and see where that takes us.
Or at least get to maybe.
Or at least get to maybe. But I think we're saying, wait a minute, this is not our culture here. We can't have BlackBerries. You know, actually, when President Obama began the administration, there were desktops with floppy drives on the desks, and you know, getting people to not hug their floppy. You know, wait a minute, this is what I'm used to. So that's the social part of it. Sure. That's the culture that inside we want to change, and we've been so used to having a different experience inside than we do when we get at home. We're used to that, and that needs to be broken. We need to break that so that we can, you know, kind of bring some of those ideas inside of the federal government and find a way to customize and do these things in a secure and protected manner.
Yeah, and I think going back to the shadow IT component, we see this across all facets, right, of government, but also private industry as well. And it comes down to one simple thing, and that tends to be agility. Right? Most people going are saying, I can't get something fast enough from my internal organization because of all the complexity that we have in a data center. It's not that we don't do, you know, what we do well. It literally is, you know, I can do something very, very quickly and swipe that and get that and start innovating in a very rapid period of time. This concept of, you know, innovate quickly and fail quickly and then, you know, iterate. And then we see, you know, this move of technology much, much faster. So I would absolutely say, for sure, it's not on wildfire like it is, I would say, in the private industry side. We have customers in the private industry side where it is, you know, corporate cards coming up and actually swiping them and then getting very, very large bills over a period of time. And at an aggregate, when you start to add all of that up, they start to look at this and go, this isn't even actually coming out of IT's budget. This is coming out of marketing, right? They're saying, you know, chief marketing officers of the future are going to be probably spending most of IT's budget, you know, moving forward. It's kind of an interesting shift. And so as IT providers, as all of us as a single team, we start to see our tenants going elsewhere and being serviced otherwise, right? And I think that's why it's powerful for that mindset shift to be more of the brokerage of those services, right? Absolutely, we need to use public cloud services and where it makes sense in the security implications, right? Because we do understand the underlying implications of security and accreditation and other things. Some of our constituents or our tenants may not recognize all of that, and that's what really concerns me about the shadow IT side is what's the implication around security to the mission, right? And we believe most folks doing it recognize this, right? It's public-facing data on public-facing websites, and that makes sense. But we just don't always know for sure, right? Take those examples by case-by-case basis. So, did either of you want to try to attack the FTAR piece of that question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to neglect that one. that piece. So I think FITARA is going to change or impact definitely how the CIO organization is. There's some, there are many CIO organizations that have lots of CIOs, and then there's some that have the one. I think it will definitely impact that budget and how that budget is used. It will definitely help us out with shared services and actually force us more into a shared services model. So there are some definite benefits to FITARA and where we may go forward with that.
Yeah, it's absolutely a structure and an organization that we need to start imparting upon the federal government. Like you said, that it doesn't make a lot of sense for a department to have a department CIO and 27 component CIOs, and that guy or gal has no control over them.
Or their budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
You need to have the budget authority and do their performance rating.
Right. You follow the money, you follow the,
Yeah.
what's really happening in the organization and
Okay.
responsibility.
I want to look to the right of the room and see if there are any other questions. Yeah, sir.
Bob Scanlon's TSA. I just wanted to explore more the social change thing that you were talking about. From these discussions, it's pretty apparent we're looking at some radical transformations in the kind of work that's being done in the federal government. Could you sort of handicap the resistance levels between senior, middle, and the worker level within organizations, and the understanding of what's coming, and just kind of how people are reacting to that, and how is there awareness of what is coming, and are you trying to do any sort of change management things that you equip people to understand that what's likely to come in? It's not if, it's just when, right? So
Right.
Let me give you a direct analogy right now. It's not data center centric, but I've got 7,000 people on XP. In the process right now of making that jump from XP to 8.1, and even more radical, giving them the option of having a tablet as opposed to a laptop. And the whole education process of that, the change that's coming, and what impact is that going to have on me and my mission. And I'm an agent out in the field, and by God, what do you mean you're not giving me a CD reader? All right, fine, I'm buying 1,000 external CD readers I can give out to them so that 900 of them will go in a desk drawer and never come out again. I know that for a fact, but that's addressing the change process some. It's what's the art of the possible. And from the different levels, at least within ATF, the senior leaders are getting the art of the possible. The mid-levels are accepting it to an extent, but you got to help convince them. And then at the worker levels, probably about half of them are embracing it and half of them are going, no sir, no way are you going to drag me anywhere farther forward.
I'm going to go way to the other side and bring up telework. It's the same thing. You have senior people, a lot of senior people who think, I need butts and seats. I need to see you here. Mm-hmm. You have the middle group who says, I can see where that works. And then you have the younger generation that says, you mean I got to come to my desk every day? I think I fall in that one.
But you work 7 days a week. You're always
I
connected.
do. I'm always on. I'm always on. And that's folks that are really, really engaged and really, really involved in IT. They'd say that's a plus, and that can be a minus as well, is that you're always on. So how productive are you if you're always on? But I think that as we break down, like I just mentioned, telework, as we break down some of these other thoughts, and the thought that, we have some very senior people who are still trying to get their mind around, okay, so we're not going to have a data center, and where is it going to be? And then if I have an outage, then who's going to go to this place? And, somebody else is going to handle that for us, and we don't have to worry about an outage. We don't have to worry about redundancy. It's resilient. That's the new word. And I think it's all in our communications plans, and how we communicate this, and how we show benefit, and how we, make sure that all of that is being communicated to those higher than us who aren't as technical, but know that we have, I know I have a room back there somewhere that has servers in it, and is the light green?
Yeah.
That's sometimes the amount of knowledge that they have is that the light has to be green. We've got to kind of educate them and say we're moving away from that model. It's all about our communication plan.
Right now, this second, I have a data center running on generator power because Pepco screwed something up and the power's not coming in the building. We don't know why. I don't care. I want to get to the point where I never get those emails again. I just want to make sure the service is coming. I don't want to run a data center and the infrastructures associated with it. It's not my expertise.
I think to go back to that partnership, one of the things that we're trying to bring from a private industry perspective is to try to share the art of the possible, right? What are the eBays, the Googles, the Nikes, the Goldman Sachs of the world? What are these guys doing in their data centers at scale, and what are the lessons they learned 4 years ago that we can then benefit from in that federal market? The blunt reality is this IT transformation is going to happen. It's happening right now, whether we know it or not. And so what I work very hard to do on a daily basis is to share that with all of our customers, right? Show them the art of the possible and show them that there is something at the end of this tunnel that we think is going to be a lot better. And it is a multi-level education process throughout. And it's a different conversation at each level. And it is definitely transformational. It is definitely disruptive, especially to some of the people and process and all the other things around acquisitions that we certainly see. But
another part of the change is who's going to be the first one out. Like, who wants to be the first one to try software-defined data centers? Nobody. We all want to wait and say, well, let's wait for someone else to do it and let them figure it out. Dow Jones is already using it, is already using that type of model. But we want, usually in the government, we want somebody in the government to be the first one out so that we can kind of see how that works out. Fair enough. But then who's that going to be?
there are people we just probably can't talk about.
Got more work to do.
So I do appreciate it. I'm getting the hook from the left over here. I do appreciate the participation, though, and thank you guys very, very much. I like the perspective. It's certainly enlightening for me to see it from your side of the fence and what we see coming here in the future. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.